Hello and welcome back to Inmr. In today's podcast, I'm going to be previewing the Brighton versus Roma match taking place at the Amex for what seems to be the Albion's final Europa League game this season. I've done it for all of Brighton's other games in the group stage, so I thought why not do it for this one as well, although the game is pretty much gone and Roma obviously have a huge advantage. Coming into this tie, it's still worth looking at both sides' tactics and some players to look out for. So it's going to be the same sort of layout as usual. We'll look at both sides' form, take a little look at the 4-0 defeat at the Stadio Olimpico, then moving on to each side's tactics, key players, and how we could see both sides line up to begin with before giving my final thoughts and what to expect from the game on Thursday. So if we start off with Brighton's last 4 games, they haven't been in very good form. This is actually, before the win against Nottingham Forest, it was their worst run under De Zerbi, losing 3 in a row. It was obviously 1-0 to Wolves in the FA Cup, 3-0 to Fulham in the Prem, and that 4-0 defeat against Roma a week ago. But they've got back to winning ways in the Premier League with a narrow 1-0 win against Nottingham Forest. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't the typical Brighton way, but they managed to get 3 points on the board to give them a little bit of confidence going into this game on Thursday. For Roma, it's been the total opposite. They're going on a nice unbeaten run, as you can see on here as well. It hasn't been a problem for them getting results. Since De Rossi's come in, they've been doing very well. They had a 3-2 win against Torino, 4-1 against Monza, 4-0 against Brighton, and most recently they drew 2-2 with Fiorentina. Last time out then, as we all know, 4-0 Roma. Brighton totally played off the pitch. There was no point where Brighton ever looked like they were going to threaten Roma, and it was a total embarrassment. The goal scorers were Dybala, Lukaku, Mancini and Cristante. I'm not going to speak too much about the game as I've already done a podcast on it, but if you do want to hear my thoughts on the 4-0 defeat, then go and check out that podcast. For those of you that have seen the previous 3 previews for the AEK Athens, Ajax and Marseille games, you'll know all about Brighton and Roberto De Zerbi's approach. Brighton play high risk, high reward football. They defend from the front and they force the ball to one side when they don't have it to try and suffocate their opponents into conceding possession. In attack, they're very patient and enjoy possession-based football. They also create numerical advantages in midfield, and one of the big things around De Zerbi is baiting that press in order to create space for players further up the pitch. However, Brighton are currently missing a lot of key players, which is making this approach very hard to execute, and that is shown by the lack of goals that we've scored in recent weeks. In terms of Roma and Daniele De Rossi's approach, it's very progressive. They play a 4-3-3 in attack, but can also play a 3-5-2 depending on the opponent. That changes. Fullbacks push up for more options in attack, and we saw that against Brighton. They had lots of players high up, with both Spinazzola and Selic pushing really high. Out of possession, they play a 4-4-2 or a 5-3-2 when very defensive, but it's more likely to be a 4-4-2 against Brighton. We probably won't see a 5-back at the Amex due to the advantage being so big. When Mourinho was at Roma, the play was counter-attack focused. That's not so important under De Rossi, but they are still doing it at times and have been very successful. It's something that works, so they do it when they need to. So as usual, I've picked out 3 key players for each side. For Brighton, I've gone for Simon Adingra, Billy Gilmour and Danny Welbeck. Adingra, I think he's been superb this season. He's really come into his own on the wing, especially since Solly March's injury. He's had a lot more minutes and he's really taken his opportunity with both hands and performed really well. Obviously he's returning from that AFCON win, and since he has got back, the form hasn't dipped either. He did really well for Ivory Coast. He came back and continued to do well in a Brighton shirt, and I do think he was one of the best players on the pitch for Brighton against Roma. Obviously that's difficult for someone to be the best player on the pitch for Brighton when they lose 4-0, but he was very good, as was Billy Gilmour. He's just seen out his last suspension after that 3-match ban for his red card against Everton. He was already available for the Roma game, but he's now available completely for games across all competitions, which is good. And against Roma he was quite good as well. So there'll be 2 that I'm looking out for in terms of getting forward and trying to get something from the game. And Danny Welbeck obviously is going to be important, because if Brighton want any chance of getting even a slither of hope that there could be a redemption story, he needs to be on top form. He needs to be putting away his chances when he gets them. He had a good 3 or 4 chances in Rome and he didn't take them, so there needs to be none of that this week. For Roma, the key players are much more obvious. Dybala and Lukaku obviously got their goals in Rome against Brighton a week ago. two really quality players who have been about for a long time. Everybody knows their talent. Obviously, Lukaku is up there in the top goal scorers in the Europa League competition. Lorenzo Pellegrini, he was not doing well at all under Mourinho, but since De Rossi's come in, he's transformed into this new player who's now become really important for Roma, and he'll play an important role in dictating the tempo, controlling the middle of the pitch. If we take a look at the potential starting 11, a couple of changes on both sides. If we look at Brighton first, I've gone for Verbruggen in goal. Still, unfortunately, wasn't good enough against Roma. He hasn't been good enough games prior to that as well. Great goalkeeper, but he just doesn't seem on it at the minute, and we don't have time to wait for him to get out of this bad patch. Verbruggen, on the other hand, has been outstanding. Back line, I believe, is exactly the same. For the game in Rome, I would have started Veltman and probably Igor as well. Just have a less attacking approach. I think Lamptey and Estupiñán like to get forward. Lamptey can obviously play as a winger as well, as we've seen this season. Maybe we shouldn't have done that in Rome. Maybe we should have taken the more defensive approach, but we didn't, and now is the time to definitely start Lamptey and Estupiñán because we need to be getting players forward. I think against Forest it worked really well with Gross a bit higher up in the midfield, and because Baleba played so well, it wouldn't do any harm to play him besides Gilmour and then have Gross playing further forward, so I've gone for that. On the left, Adingra, I just think he's brilliant. I don't think you can bench him. Buonanotte, he can obviously go on either side, so Adingra could start on the right, Buonanotte could go on the left. You could even take off Buonanotte and have Ansu Fati playing. Unfortunately, João Pedro's out. Ferguson, he's having a dry spell in front of goal at the minute. He hasn't scored since the Nottingham Forest game at the City ground in November, I believe, so he hasn't scored in a very long time. Welbeck, I think he's just got a lot more experience, and when the chance comes, I hope that he can take them. For Rome, there aren't many changes, just the two, one in midfield and one on the wing. I've gone for Bova instead of Paredes, I believe it was. I just think because they're 4-0 up, they could afford to put a couple of young players on, give them some minutes, and then, you know, in turn rest key players. Zalewski on the left instead of El Shawari, once again just resting a key player and giving a young one some minutes, seeing as they are ahead. So my final thoughts going into the game on Thursday, if we're being realistic, Brighton are just playing for pride. It's just them sort of signing off from what's been a historical campaign already. Yes, it hasn't ended the way that we all wanted it to, but that's football. So this is just a case of enjoying the last moments of Brighton being in a European competition. And I think as Brighton fans, we just need to enjoy it for what it is. 7 years ago, we were promoted to the Premier League. We got that 1-0 win where Pascal Gross scored against Man United right at the end of the season to keep us up. Nobody would have thought that 6-7 years on, Brighton had topped a Europa League group and gone to Rome to play in the knockout stages. I think just enjoy it for what it is. Obviously, it would have been nice for there to be a bit of a contest at the Amex. Saying that, there is probably 1% of me holding out hope for a 5-0. I've accepted that Brighton's campaign in the Europa League is over, but you still can't help but think, what if? That is where I'm going to end today's podcast, but there's plenty of others coming this week. This is the second of 3 coming out this week. Make sure to follow Inmr on X and Instagram for even more content, and when my website is back up and running, be sure to check that out too. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.